There's people that line up to confess to crimes for whatever reason. It's absolutely nuts.
That's true too. That is 100% true. And that's kind of why, like, for instance, like and this will be a good transition to the Idaho case. You have a lot of folks that are saying, hey, the original timeline was between 3 and 4. That was the truth. And this 4 to 5 or 4 to 4:30 range is a lie. And I'm like, no, that's in case somebody comes in and confesses and they say, yeah, I did that at 3:45. They know that it's not the guy. It's a false confession. Sure. Four University of Idaho students lose their life. 2 University of Idaho students, survivors in the house, no phone call for 8 hours. Brings up a lot of conspiracy and a lot of misinformation that has been out there. If you were called to that scene, let's walk it through as if you were the CSI on the scene. You get called out to a quadruple homicide. At what point of the investigation, first and foremost, do you think that they're contacting forensics to go out there?
Well, there's a lot of things that has to happen. When the first responding officer gets there, of course, you go in and they have to check for signs of life, for the fact that you get into a scene, we have to secure it. We have to make sure also that victims are deceased or, so there is a potential of cross-contamination and disruption of evidence. Once that's done, the scene is secured and the investigator gets there. Now we're talking about a household that not only has multiple tenants, we have a process that before CSI can process it, we have to go get some search warrants for the fact that other people either are there at the time, they may be victims or they may be witnesses, or they may have some type of privacy under the Fourth Amendment that we have to have a search warrant before we start processing. And so you may have 5 or 6 hours before and during that process of obtaining that search warrant before you can go in, that once you determine that there's no sustainability or aid that you can give to the victims before you can start processing the scene, because you do not want fruits from that poison tree by going in there processing and then someone turns out to be that they're a suspect in the case and you violated their Fourth Amendment.
I know this comes up a lot. Some folks will say, they had access to the victim's phones and that the parents of a victim had, the passwords and stuff, that they can give permission to law enforcement, thus they don't need a warrant. Is that accurate?
Well, when you're talking about the victims that, now they, if they're deceased and it's the victim's phone, that is not something that anyone else has privacy rights to. So,
well, I think that, so for instance, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have spoken with Kaylee's mom a couple of times, Kaylee Goncalves, and she has, told us about the phone and that they never had the phone, that they only had the phone records, that police had that phone. And there was a lot of, warrants that went out for, like, for instance, Kaylee's Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat. And a lot of questions came about was like, all right, well, they have permission from the mom who, would probably give permission. There wouldn't be a need to get all these warrants. I think that it's probably more of a cover your tail type of thing to ensure you get all those.
You're talking about institutions and something separate than just what's on their phone that they look at. No,
right.
You're correct that when you go out and you're going to these servers and to where data is kept and maintained by corporations, that yes, there's certain protocols and procedures you need to go out and fulfill. Used to, we could just call up whoever the phone company was and say, hey, can you tell me whose phone number this is? And it changed over the years. And, and that's the thing about the court systems and certain procedures and court precedents are set from case to case. And so now, out of abundance of caution, absolutely get a search warrant if at all possible, for the fact that you don't want to be that landmark case that loses a case due to just doing something that would have taken another 30 minutes.
Yeah, 100%, especially if they're going forensically through, a phone, if they're going through Facebook messages, what kind of rights do the other person on the other side of those messages have, to privacy or whatever the case may be. So I think it's always probably in the best interest of law enforcement to get a warrant, regardless of the situation. So you arrive on scene. You said that there's a lot of stuff that comes up before. One of the biggest questions in this case is that, Sergeant Payne showed up at about 4 or 5 o'clock. It was several hours after 911 was called. And apparently he walked the scene. He saw the knife sheath, but apparently, according to other affidavits, that knife sheath wasn't seen. They had to be told about it. And that's been one of the biggest conspiracies. Now, me personally, I think that once the lead investigator saw the evidence, that it would be collected. At what point is that evidence collected? Is it right after the lead investigator sees it, or is there a certain process before it has to happen?
There's going to be a process that you have to work your way into that scene. You know, we have 4 different victims, so we have 4 independent crime scenes. Each victim is a crime scene in and of themselves. Whatever conflicts and struggle for life, interactions, DNA transfers, fingernail scrapings, all of this, each victim carries this of that during these violent struggles that and those interactions that we have potential that to be able to get it. But now we also have to work our way into how did that offender get into that residence? How did that offender leave that residence? Is there signs of forced entry? And if not, are there signs of how he might have left the residence? And you have to make these choices that if you have a blood trail here, or if you have a certain thought that, okay, he went out the back of the residence versus the front of the residence. If you had to give me a choice of which way a homicide victim or perpetrator is going to leave, whichever way in the middle of the night that has the less light is one I'm going with. And is, so if I had a 50-50 and I didn't have any other weight to consider, then I'm going in through the front door, and process myself in very carefully, looking for hair fiber, drug transfers, blood drops, and bringing all the tools in that we can. You've got alternate light sources. You've got your own visual eyes. You got flashlights. There's a lot of ways as you work your way in. And then once you get to a certain area, you got to make choices. I've got to process myself to the one that will have the least amount of impact on the other crime scene victims. And so, it's a long process. There's nothing easy about it.
And before you enter a house or any of those things, there is a person there writing down a log of everybody entering and going. It is
arriving.
Right. Extremely organized. A lot of things are documented to ensure the integrity of the scene. In a situation like where, for instance, if you were to get to a room, like it's been alleged that the second bedroom was blocked by one of the victims. That was told to me by Kaylee Goncalves. She stated that the person that ended up calling 911 got a phone call from one of the victims or the surviving victims, or both of the victims. It wasn't verified if it was just one or both, but he ended up getting a call. He shows up. He couldn't get through the door because one of the bodies was blocking. He pushed it enough to kind of look in, saw what he saw, then they called 911. In a situation where you can't get into a crime scene because there's a body being blocking the door, how does that become processed? What is done in those types of situations?
All right. Let's address one other issue before we get to the inside of the house. Now, while the search warrant is being done in any common area that's open to the public outside the residence, you can start processing. You can start looking for evidence. You can look for vehicles. You can look for blood trails. You can bring in canines. You can do whatever you need to out in the public area. But now that you've entered the residence, and okay, you go up those steps, you processed yourself that I have a victim here in the doorway. The one that's inside, of course, is also deceased. So we're going to have to process this one at the door first. Everything has to be handled here because we don't want to transfer through footprints and introduce evidence into that until we get this processed here. We'll get in there to the other victim. Now, when he opened that door and looked in there, if he saw a sign of life, then, of course, we have to just, absolutely just step over the first victim and we go into whatever will save and preserve life. And but that choice didn't arise. And so, but yes, we processed one in the door would be my manner of processing the scene. I don't know what manner they did.
Yeah, I assume, when it came to the probable cause affidavit, that was one of the things that it didn't mention about, or there was some question marks about Ethan's body, its location in the room. It specified that there had to be an autopsy done later to identify his injuries. Is that because his injuries were so severe it couldn't have been determined at that time and they needed an autopsy? Or is that because if his body was the one blocking the door and it had to be moved, that it had to have a different process?
Well, and this is meaning when I said that I was surprised at the lack of blood evidence at the Delphi case. This is what the other side of the pole is. This is what I would expect under an edge weapon, that when you have such an incident that occurs and you have a struggle for life and you have a victim that's in this battle and struggle, they're going to have a lot of defensive injuries. There's going to be a lot of heavy staining, blood flows, and you're not going to be able to identify all those injuries. And so you're going to have a tremendous amount, and there's nothing clean about a knife attack. It's extremely messy, and it's absolutely things that nightmares are made of.
Yeah. No, 100%. And one quick question, just leaving the scene real quick. In your experience, somebody with a K-bar knife, do you think that they had ample amount of time to commit the crime solo, one person, 9 to 11 minutes, go in there and dispatch four young, beautiful people?
I think so. If you we watched another trial, O.J. Simpson. He encountered two individuals, one of them highly trained that was into martial arts. If he is the offender, whoever the offender was able to do it in a public section near a sidewalk and it not be discovered for some time. And so that's two individuals. But for this offender, 8 to 9 minutes, yes, because, it would be tight. He would, I fought 3 individuals one time. There was 4 of us in the fight. There was 3 on 1, and we fought for 12 minutes. And we were 4 pretty bloodied individuals at the end of that. But can you fight that long? Yes, it's possible. Now, I was in my 20s then. You fight me now, I've got about 30 seconds, and that's it. But back in those days, and you look at an individual that's trained, that's an athlete, yes, he may be able to, and that may be what allowed the other victims to survive, that he was spent, because 9 minutes is a long time, guys.
No, yeah, it definitely is. What do you got, Jaime?
I was gonna say, wasn't in China the subway attacks? Weren't they knife attacks? Didn't the guy stab 26 people or something like that at one point in 5-10 minutes?
Yeah. The knife is a very quick weapon. Yeah. A lot of folks don't think how fast it could be because they assume a gun is the fastest way to go in there and commit a crime like this. Which
I'd rather face a gun than a knife, guys.
You rather what?
I'd rather face a gun than a knife.
Yeah, I mean, you got a person that's behind that trigger has to know how to use it too.
Yeah. When it comes down to the knife sheath, if it wasn't for the knife sheath, do you think they would find out what kind of knife it was to begin with?
There's a good, because there's a lot of telltale signs that whenever you use some type of edge weapon, you can tell length of the blade from certain injuries, the width, thickness, if it has any type of like the back cut blade for, I don't know what type of K-bar this was. If it has certain characteristics, plus if he had contact with any of the bedding material or the clothing, that you can get an outline of that knife almost, I've seen it where it looks like you draw the picture of it, it's of the blade itself. Or and you may have, after those first injuries, that the guard on the knife, that if it comes in contact with clothing, you'll be able to see the outline of that guard, either on skin or on clothing, once it's processed. So there's a lot of telltale signs from edge weapons that can identify characteristics of that knife, from the guard to handles to even the outline of the blade.
Speaking of the guard on the knife, if the suspect is putting so much force behind the stabbing itself, wouldn't that guard leave a bruise on his hand?
Very possible. If he hits bone or something, or if he misses and he hits a headboard or he hits something, absolutely. And they can break. Knives break. I've seen them break.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can you, if there was some metal fragments in one of the victim's bodies, is there a way to tell from the metal composition of where it was made and try to find a manufacturer for it that way?
I would expect so, because like I said, the labs and what they can do with some of the equipment and technologies out there now, that they could pretty well, tell a lot of different things. Did it come from what class of iron, ore, or wherever? You see that stuff, and it's in the movies. And if it's in the movies, there's some basis of truth behind it, guys. There really is.
100%. What about if you can you tell on a stabbing victim if the offender was left or right-handed?
Sometimes it depends. Now, if you can place the victim and then you can place the offender, and you may have, because there's a lot of things that happen in the blood pattern analysis. Through a struggle, you're going to have motions of hands, and you're going to have what is called cast off, not only from the weapon, but from the hand. You'll have cast off from the victims also that are fighting defensive injuries. And if you can place that offender in a face-to-face confrontation, and then you see what side of the body that the victim's injuries are on, then of course, yes, it's easy to identify. And you may also be able to see that, if all the cast off, if you have two individuals faced off and all the cast off is to the right of one offender and to the left of the other, then that means that, and you can place where the victim is due to that they're laying there, then we know that all the cast off came from and to the right, then he's right-handed. See what I'm trying to say there?
Can you tell if there is a, like for instance, in this case, we have 4 victims, right, in 2 different rooms. If 2 offenders went into that room with 2 similar knives, would you be able to tell that the same offender just based on their wounds, if it was the same offender, if there was two offenders?
There's sometimes you may even have the shadowing effect, whereas if there are more than one offender, and you see a lot of it with high velocity blood spatter, when you may have someone that shoots someone, and the back spatter will create a shadow that there's an absence of blood behind them. And so you could have the same thing, that if you have a fight going over here and you have a blood cast off pattern, and then all of a sudden there's a void, and then it starts up again, and you have this repeated, that there may have been someone standing over there. And if it's not another victim, it can be another offender. And so we don't know, but the of what's in that crime scene, but there's so much to tell. And blood pattern analysis is absolutely fascinating. And it can tell you so much, the story of what went on in those rooms.
You know, just looking at so you said that you would arrive first and you would look at the outside of the building. Outside of the back of the what was suspected to be Xana's bedroom was what looked like blood coming down onto the foundation. Just kind of seeing that from the outside without looking inside, what would that tell you about that scene, seeing the blood coming out like that?
Well, of course, first question, is that blood? And if so, who's on the other side of that wall? If that was, and I've seen those pictures, and that's a tremendous amount. The floor seal evidently wasn't sealed very well for it to pass under, because most flooring in houses, you normally wouldn't have that. You wouldn't expect that. But I was surprised to see it.
Yeah, no, I was too.
It usually has like a flashing between the wall itself and the concrete itself. So it's weird to see it actually seep out. And if it did, there was a lot of blood coming up through there.
So by seeing that, does that say to you that there's a body in close proximity, or can there be a body a little bit further away in it?
No, I would think that, yes, this is where one of them was within just a foot or two.
Good deal. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. Kind of looking at that scene, I was like, I don't think that person was.
And they sustained an injury at a low point, for the fact that for that amount of blood, you almost have to totally take a lot of blood out of that victim. And it has to be injuries that will allow that blood flow. It's not like if you're laying on your back and you get a high point center chest, there's going to be very little blood flow. Everything's just going to, once the heart stops, everything's just going to settle. But if you have injuries to lower or back or to the chest face down, that allows all that blood to pool outside the body, that's where you get all this massive blood flow.
Yeah, that makes sense. So apparently, looking at the probable cause affidavit, and they're using the DNA on the sheath as evidence against Kohberger. What that tells me is that there isn't any other DNA evidence underneath the fingernails or anywhere else, because I would assume that DNA would have been used to arrest Bryan Kohberger. So just kind of, looking at it from that angle, then it appears that they don't have that. Are you surprised by the fact that there's a lack of DNA evidence from a perp? Locard's
principle of exchange, absolutely. Once again, just like with the Delphi, I expect it's there. It's just not been discovered, for the fact that you have 4 violent encounters. You have a man that possibly may have injured himself, and you would have that DNA mixture if he had cut himself, because that's quite often that does occur, that, during the struggle, you may throw a hand up and they may deflect your arm and you may cut yourself. Obviously that didn't happen, or we don't know of it. It may have happened, but they haven't released that information yet. That I would expect that there was, and the lack of DNA shows that there is a tremendous amount of planning to make sure that we don't have that transfer. Yeah, from what I was told, that this person was very intelligent, that the law enforcement officers were aware of how intelligent he was. From details that I have uncovered, basically, it is suspected that the perpetrator opened the back sliding glass door and never touched it again in efforts to not leave DNA behind. I thought that when you look at where the position of Dylan's bedroom, it is right across from the kitchen and right next to the stairs that are going up. If Bryan Kohberger isn't familiar with that area, even if he's, visually seeing that, stalking and looking, that door isn't visible from, unless you go into the backyard and stand in front of that glass door, it's kind of hard to see that door where Dylan's bedroom is. If the intent was to not touch anything as little as possible, if he saw that door and he thought it was a closet door, I can see why he wouldn't try to open it. If he's not, if he thinks it's a closet, he's going to move up to the top and then move around. He hears something. My theory is that he's driving around and that Xana ordered a DoorDash, and that given the fact that, the location of her house is kind of tricky to find, she probably left some sort of indicator on, maybe a light outside, a light inside, to, inform the DoorDasher this is where the location is at.
we see that after 4 o'clock is when Bryan Kohberger starts to, at least his driving starts to be a little bit erratic. The allegedly Bryan Kohberger, we know at 4 o'clock is when Xana supposedly receives the DoorDash. At 4:05 is when the white Elantra stops, does this weird turn at Queen apartment 502, then attempts to either stop or do a turnaround in front of the victim's residence. Doesn't successfully do that. Goes further, does a 3-point turn at the King and Queen Road residence, and then comes back all the way around. And when he comes back around, if the audio of that Linda Lane footage is accurate, it sounds like he hits the horn at 4:07, which tells me he's probably grabbing a bag from his passenger seat, getting prepared to go in, and he hit the horn on accident. But you can tell at that moment things got real for this guy, and he was making tremendous amount of mistakes. I think he walked in, he went upstairs, he left the back sliding glass door. I think Xana may have felt the draft coming in, walked out there, said, I think somebody's here, sees the door, turns around, walks back to where her boyfriend is sleeping already, or still sleeping. And before she can alert him, she is surprised from behind. And then there's a struggle there with Ethan. And that's kind of my thoughts as far as where everything is at and how it looks. And from my understanding as well, both scenes were pretty much contained to the bedrooms, meaning there wasn't a lot of blood going back and forth between the scenes. For somebody to go in there and commit a crime like this and not get blood on their feet, I would assume. Are you surprised that there isn't some sort of evidence between the rooms?
Well, it depends on where the injuries were. If he's on the bed and he's kneeling or laying on the bed, he's jumped on him and he's on his knees, and the fight is on those first two upstairs. I don't know. Yeah. And it's one thing when you're fighting standing up and you have a mobile victim. It's a different thing when you are fighting a victim that's on their back, and you may be attacked by another victim from the side flanking that's on that bed. You're on your knees. So anything that happened, and I'm just speculating, that if he went in and surprised the two victims in the bed upstairs first, and that confrontation never got to the floor, then I wouldn't expect that there would be a lot. We do know that there was blood prints in front of Dylan's door, and this is where there are victims that are upright and mobile. And now we have transfers. We have shoe patterns that law enforcement says that where she said he was at, we have shoe prints. And so now that's supporting evidence of that someone in that room, that there was an encounter that he encountered, say, whoever the victim in the door was, that they're bleeding. He had to step over and go find the other one. And now we have to come back through that victim that's at the door. See what I'm saying?
But it's just one print, and it's over here in this area by where Dylan's bedroom is. The killer would have had to have walked down this hall and through this living area and just to leave this one spot.
Now, there's one they got. There may be others. They just may not be cleared, or they were contaminated, or there's a lot of things that could have happened to those prints. And whatever the material was that he was doing the transfer, because you can have oversaturation from a print, but eventually you're going to have one that is at almost pristine transfer, that you start off extremely messy and you can't tell anything other than it's a blob. But as you get less and less, there's going to be one that stands out that says, this is our best one. And is that the spot? I don't know.
The probable cause affidavit states that the footprint was found at the second go through while utilizing amino black. What does that mean?
It's just another one of the tests that you test and blood pattern analysis of applying chemicals that interact with blood. Oh, I have it at the lab. I have some amino black myself, but it's just the same with luminol. Not the same. It's a different chemical that has a reaction that you don't need alternate light sources to see the reaction. It's just a different processing agent. And but anyone that wants to look at these things, you can go to. I order all my chemicals from Searchy, and so you go on there and you see all these presumptive blood tests, and you can see certain chemicals used to enhance alternate light sources. There's so much things that can bring where things can be collected and seen due to chemical reactions of processing a scene. And each CSI guy has to make the choice, what's going to give me the best results on this particular print. So they chose amino black.
So they would have to visually be able to see it, right? They're not just putting amino black on the floor and seeing if anything pops.
Yeah, they would have had something that said, oh, there's something here.
Yeah, because that was one of the biggest concerns, was that print wasn't visible, that they had to utilize some sort of technology to bring it up. And, it sounds like it was visible and it would have had to have been visible for them to apply it to the area. It is suspected that the perpetrator may have worn some Dickies work pant coveralls. Are you familiar with that type of material? And if so, like how protective could that be for, for one, for the perpetrator not to leave DNA behind, and also for him not to get DNA from the victims?
I did some testing on that of removal of clothing to try to determine how quick that if you committed and you had to transfer. Once again, Mrs. Steve and I, we went out and we interacted and threw synthetic blood on each other, trying to replicate and how protective each layer would be. And we used Tyvek painter suits, but the Dickies outerwear would probably, be something along those lines. And it could, do I think it was 100% effective? Probably not. But the more layers he put on, the more likely he would have minimized that by the time he got to his vehicle. If he took that outer layer off, took off a layer of gloves, and so that he wouldn't have any type of transfer. And then if he had a different pair of shoes, but that takes planning, and that takes a highly intelligent, motivated, mission-oriented individual that has a plan that I'm going to commit whatever homicide I'm going to commit, and
right.
how I'm going to get away with it. And I mean, you're talking about an animal that this monster of pre-planning, stalking, carrying out is, like I said, this is something made for the movies.
So if it wasn't Bryan Kohberger, and who would you suspect? What kind of person would you have suspected this to have committed this crime? I mean, obviously, I personally don't think some drunk college kid could have gone in there, committed this crime, and not leave DNA behind. I don't think an ex-boyfriend, in a crime of passion, would have committed a crime without leaving DNA behind. It seems like it's somebody very skilled, somebody who's maybe done this before. What are your thoughts?
We look at the residents. We know it's not someone hitchhiking through on the interstate system that's at the edge of town that is hunting food, a vehicle, some type of enrichment of his life just to get to the next town, or some type of serial offender that's doing it for whatever fantasy fed. We're looking at a resident that was chosen that's in the middle of, surrounded by all different types of housing. And so I would be looking for someone that absolutely they were targeted. Someone in this house was targeted. Now I've got to determine which one of them was targeted and why. And I believe that will be the case.
Do when processing a crime scene, when it comes down to the doors and the doorknobs, would they be removed and then put as evidence, or would they just be swabbed?
I would prefer that if I see something or if I process it, and anytime you process, say that you're processing a doorknob and you're putting powder. In this case, if you've had blood stains and things, absolutely, we're going to try to take that doorknob. If it's something that doesn't appear to have any blood stain and we processed it with whatever type of chemicals to see that, no, we don't have this, and we have to make decisions. Do we use powder? Do we use a chemical? Once again, you have to weigh, what am I processing, and what evidence is supporting that he touched this doorknob, and did he touch it on the way in? If the door, because going up, and we don't know the victimology of the girls on the top floor. Did everyone in that residence normally keep their doors closed? If so, that you may be able to, that before any introduction of blood to the crime, he had to open that door. So to open that door, you may, on the outside of that door handle, oh yeah, I'm just going to process this with powder. But then we have to look at that when he was leaving that bloody crime scene, did he pull the door shut behind him? And then if we did that, now we've got to determine what we're going to do with this. And that has a lot to do with that first responding officer. How did you find this door? Was it open? Was it closed? And there's so much stuff to determine, evaluate, and decisions to be made.
When it comes back to the sheath, though, there was DNA found inside of the button. According to the defense, that sheath was face down underneath the body, and I was partially underneath the body and underneath the comforter. I'm assuming that there was probably a lot of blood in that area, given the nature of the crime. Is it possible that that sheath had more DNA? And if it was like transfer DNA and it got covered in blood, would that overcome it, or would you be able to pull that out?
Regarding the sheath, I think the sheath is there due to the fact that he is wearing layers. He's wearing something like that Dickies, that he doesn't have a belt to put that knife in, and he has it in hand. And during that process, and if he has it in hand, then we have to do so that he had some type of gloves on, because you would have more DNA from a naked hand that's holding a sheath during an encounter, or even during the transport. we don't have all this DNA transfer, touch DNA on this sheath. So how is that possible? And then it's only limited to inside those buttons. Looking in hindsight and thinking about what would protect that sheath from DNA, what would allow that sheath not to be on his person, such as in a belt, because how many times do we see people walking the street with a knife that's sheath and it's on their belt? You don't see people walking around the street with knives in their hands carrying the sheath. And the only reason that you would, and if not to leave DNA, you have to have some type of protective gloves on. And why did he fail? Did he absolutely clean that sheath? And what did he clean it with that wouldn't have DNA on it? Because if it's something from his home environment, it had to be cleaned at some point.
They got a video of him buying a bunch of supplies in different places. So he may have, bought these supplies and, never touched them. I mean, I don't know, until it was time to clean these items and or, get down to the planning aspect of it. I believe that he had purchased the coveralls, according to what we have seen, like within a couple of, or what's been disclosed. And I don't know how true it is or how not true it is. It's been in the, I think it was maybe it was Dateline that said it, that in the days leading up to the murders is when they have a receipt for a Dickies tag that he purchased those Dickies clothing. I think that would make sense, because if he had it in his home, there would be an opportunity for DNA to get all over it, thus transfer it back.
When it comes down to the Dickies, I said earlier that they're stain resistant, right? And they're a little bit harder to puncture, I believe, than regular material, right?
Yeah, yes, they're more of a quarter. Some of them are. I don't know which ones he bought. I think that there may be different materials they use. Like I said, I don't know what brand. I know what brand, but I just don't know of which of the type of material.
Yeah, I own Dickies. I used to wear a lot of Dickies actually, but I remember they would last forever. I mean, they would last forever. They would puncture, but it wouldn't. How other material you puncture and it'll run after a while real fast. These will puncture, they'll stay there for a while and they wouldn't run.
Yeah, it's very high durable stuff. When it comes to the car, though, so we're the biggest concern or the biggest question that a lot of folks have is that there was no DNA from the victims inside his Elantra. And we can probably assume that thing was taken piece by piece apart. How surprised were you when that information came out?
I'm still surprised. I look at this and I'm absolutely surprised. And once again, you have to say that this is not a crime, that if he is the offender and that is his vehicle and he went from a crime scene and was able to leave within that time frame, his abilities and his structures and his thought processes to do that means that we prepped a vehicle, the interior of, and when we prepped ourselves to be able to either change out our first layer, get in a vehicle that has protective measures, go to a safe area, clean our vehicle, transfer everything back out, and then within a few hours go back to our residence with no DNA in the vehicle, and rely upon repeated cleaning of that. Did I miss something?
Yeah. I was surprised as well. It was something that I thought was going to be, there was going to be something there. I didn't think there was any absolute way that he wasn't going to be able to overcome that. But then, I went back and I started to read the probable cause affidavit again, and it mentions his long trip around after the murders that gets him to Pullman around 5:36. And I was wondering myself, why take that route? Even if you're going to go hide something and put it out there somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you're still taking a very long route. And then I realized, well, he turned his phone off during the commission of the crime. He turned it off in Pullman. He turned it on outside of the radius in which he may have known that law enforcement were going to look at, and or maybe perhaps he pulled up, the towers for that area. And when he got out of a certain distance, he turned his phone on. Regardless, it worked. Honestly, if it wasn't for the knife sheath, based on what the fact that they had to use an IgG to get him, tells me that they had no idea it was him at that point. And so his actions work. But my thought is, he takes this long trip because law enforcement is going to say, all right, we have a white vehicle without a front license plate driving around suspiciously between 4 o'clock and 4:20. If this vehicle left town and it headed towards Blaine, Idaho, it would have been there within a certain amount of time. If it left to Genesee, if it left to Pullman, it would be there within a certain amount of time. And that law enforcement officers would be surveilling cameras for that specific time to see if a vehicle's coming in. So he took a long trip that would take longer than it would be assumed that law enforcement would search those cameras. And if he went to that extent, just so that he doesn't get caught on cameras pulling into Pullman, I mean, he must have gone to a great extent everywhere else.
I agree.
So I just think that this guy is, I think, and that's what the motive is. My opinion is, I think the house is the motive. when you look at what was going on in Kohberger's life at the time, he had lost the majority of his jobs. He had lost his security job while he was at DeSales. There was a resignation letter that was produced, and on the resignation letter, it stated that he was aware that he understood had he not resigned, that termination could be an end result of his employment there, meaning that if he didn't quit, they were going to fire him. So he had different situations throughout his life. I think in high school, he got kicked out of a law enforcement class. And although there's not much to say where or why, but he was put in a classroom without females. And then you have the only place where he seemed to have thrived was DeSales University. However, he was there during the pandemic, and a bunch of those courses were online. So he wasn't there personally. And then he gets this, recommendation for the PhD program. So, he's thinking he's the big fish. He goes out to a rural area. We find out that there is an email in April from Pullman Chief Jenkins, a correspondence between him and Bryan Kohberger referencing an interview they had for his possible position as an intern police officer within their department. And we know that he applied in the fall. So if he didn't, if he applied in the spring and had to apply in the fall, that kind of tells me he didn't get it, probably because of his background that he had. And then he goes to WSU, apparently has a bunch of problems with female students there, has problems with a certain professor, ends up getting in altercations and gets kicked out. I think that, I forgot to mention, if, what Dateline and NBC are saying are accurate, that they have a receipt for a K-bar knife in April, the same month that I'm assuming he's probably getting turned down for the intern, job as a police officer. All these things are going negative in his life. The school is turning him away. The police department's turning him away. So he wants to have some sort of revenge in the area, so to speak. But he's smart enough to know that if he commits this crime against any of the people that he really probably wants to commit this crime towards, that it would come back to him. So he chooses somewhere else. He had supposedly this one guy that was friends with him came out and started talking. They had text messages where Bryan Kohberger stated that he wanted to be involved in a high profile case, stated that he wanted to be the detective to solve it, but that it was going to be very difficult for him to be in those positions. So I'm thinking he really did want to get involved in a high profile case. And, there's 3 roles: police officer, the victim, or the perpetrator. I don't think he wanted to be the other two. He goes out there, he finds the house with the biggest party, that'll attract national attention, and then he follows him. I think he chooses that house because of the traffic that's in and out of there. He had access to probably some police information, may have known that there was going to be a force out there that was trying to deter underage drinking. We know that because there's the Banfield, police officers that had stopped out with those guys in the Banfield. And, I think that was going to be a deterioration of drinking, which was going to stop the parties as well. So he would have known that possibly. So, I think it all lines up, in my opinion. And I think that maybe perhaps the house indeed was the target to create a bigger crime. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, he wanted, his whole purpose to create fear in the community. What was his driving motivation for this crime? Was it specifically one victim, or is there more to it, that he wanted to be a serial offender, that sort of like what BTK did to Wichita?
Yeah.
That you start off and you do this, and was that part of his purpose? We don't really know yet, but there is that part, and he's a failure. But the scary part is that there's others out there that are just as evil as he is, that are successful at this, and have victims out there that we may or may not even know about.
In your opinion, do you think this is the first offense for this person?
I think he has other crimes. Are there other homicides? I don't know, but he would have other crimes that are supporting of his mental. There's certain crimes as far as that. He likes to take late night drives. Who are the other victims? What areas did he visit? Where did he take these late night drives? Is he one of these individuals that parks his vehicle and goes through neighborhoods, peeping Tom type of offender? Is he stalking other victims on these late night drives of these and looking for potential victims that are walking down streets, hitchhikers, some of the human trafficking victims, things of that nature? Because I love working the night shift, from that morning watch from midnight to early mornings, because there's a certain type of individuals out there. Some of them are extremely hardworking people, and that's the job that they work and the shift that they work. But there are some very odd individuals that frequent that night, because they'll go in these neighborhoods, and they are these peeping Tom stalker type of individuals they'll go into a house, break into a residence, and stand at the foot of the bed until the victim wakes up. I mean, what kind of nut does that take?
Yeah, 100%. There are definitely some crazies that are out.
You said, Steve, that the crime itself, it looked like it was planned really, really, really good. And you see that, for me, I see if there was planned, months or whatever time it took, there would be more evidence, right, of him making the plans, especially in those 51 terabytes that they have, right, on his computer. You think the possibility of there being plans on there is real good.
I think they have of his digital footprint and of the computers and what other devices does he have? What's in his purchase history? Does he know that they're going to be doing certain things? And does he deliberately stay away from it? Because we're talking about a guy that if I was in the room with him, he's absolutely far more intelligent than I. I mean, he's going getting the highest level of education that only a small percentage of people can achieve, and he knows what law enforcement is going to be looking for, and he's prepping for that. And so, would he create a digital trail, or would he do a lot of it of old school, of pen and paper and just drawing it out? I think with the Golden State offender, that when he was he did a lot of artwork and drawings.
Mm-hmm.
But that was pre-computer, and he just did it out of necessity. But with Kohberger realized that, yes, this is how they're going to track me, is that if I do anything digitally, so therefore I have to stay away from it. But still, he underestimated law enforcement, and it's brilliant how they came to this and started the camera canvas and acquiring all that digital, something that will play huge roles in the future as we get more and more cameras out there, rings and things that they will play an important part, and they'll be able to use this case, Idaho, in so many ways about how to go out there and acquire those camera and create that roadmap of who's on the roads, when, what intersection do they, I think they did the same thing in the Boston bombers, that they used those cameras from corner to corner and was able to track those brothers.
Yeah. When in this case, does it amaze you the fact that the roommates didn't hear the commotion happening in the rooms?
What was the normal? And that's the thing, we don't know what the normal activity of a college campus and the normal things that occurred in this house. I don't know what the level of activity was and what time. If you're getting home at the times they got and you're still ordering food at 4:00, that this isn't the first time that's ever occurred. And so we have activities of what went on. Now I'm speculating on that, but I would expect that or not that, normal sleep patterns, everyone has them. And when you're in college or otherwise, that you're in this type of environment, what was their normal weekend patterns? And if it's within that parameters, the one witness says, I thought they were upstairs playing with a dog.
Yeah.
And then they hear those other voices. And, there's a lot of oddities about why certain things weren't discovered. But, I'm not going to be blaming other survivors for whatever happened. They're very lucky that they survived.
Danny, you're on.
So a couple of questions. A lot of the conspiracies out there is that there's some sort of drugs related and things of that nature. Now, I know that based on the probable cause affidavit and a lot of the court documents, that all of the phones were digitally downloaded. Wouldn't there be some sort of evidence of that communication for some sort of drug stuff? And I mean, I just feel like there would have been some sort of evidence on that phone, and that would have been crossed out pretty quickly. Is that accurate?
Not only that, but you'd have the camera activities. They were able to track him. You're the worst drug dealer in the world if all you've got coming to your house is someone delivering food.
That is true. I didn't think about that. The only person that's coming up to the house is delivering food. That is very true. Is there a way a person can erase everything off of their phone that they can't be found within a specific amount of time?
I don't believe so. I mean, I can barely, when you go on a computer, you find out that, yes, you can go in there and delete, but no, people that know how can find what's out there, because now we have the cloud base and you have all this other stuff. And so I absolutely, when it comes to all this Google stuff and these computers and these devices, every time I get accustomed to using a device, Mrs. Steve goes and buys me a new one, and I'm as lost as last year's Easter egg of trying to figure it out the next week. So trying to delete all the information, I don't think is possible, because there's so many apps out there that store your information, that you're in constant contact, that you have an app on your phone and you don't know that it's sending out information or what information it's sending or tracking and how you're linked up with everybody else.
Yeah, makes sense.
What's it called? I was going to ask you, Steve, knowing, there's a lot of talk that the house itself was a party house. How much harder does it make it for, CSI to assess the whole crime scene?
Well, it's extremely difficult because you got so much DNA there. But the DNA that we have to identify with is what is within the crime scene itself. Some of the common areas, like at the kitchen sink or in the bathroom downstairs in the sink and stuff, you may be able to say that, anyone's DNA there is, easily there's excuses of why it could be there. Mm. But on the sheath under the victim is not something of a party goer. Yeah. Or if you have a hair or a fiber or any type of cross contamination from the scene to the victim or suspect, that those are the things that we have to look for. The most recent outer layer type of evidence.
When it comes to a crime scene, and you have, all right, so in the defense in the Bryan Kohberger case are claiming that there are 2 unknown DNA samples that are somewhere in the area near where the 2 of the bodies were located. And they were asking the question if those things were processed and or if there was any workup on those. Now, I know that there's some rules with the IGG as far as, FBI involvement and how they can get involved, but is there like a specific maybe pecking order as far as how DNA is processed, as far as importance? Like if you find the DNA on a sheath and then you find DNA on a shelf, 20 feet away in the same room, but in the opposite corner, do you process or try to test that DNA first before moving on to maybe some DNA that is a little bit further out?
And that's something else about that. The way that they can analyze and the quickness of the return of the results is absolutely amazing, because there was a kidnapping, I think, happened in Tennessee, and off a flip-flop, they were able to identify the offender within 48 hours or something. That happened last year. So, but yes, the pecking order of how DNA is that the more likely it's involved, that okay, you get there and you have a knife sheath under the victim, and then you have a knife sheath in a back closet on the top shelf. Mm-hmm. Which one do we process first? The closer it's to the scene, the more likely it has involvement with is the pecking order all the way out. And if you have other bloodstain items, those things with DNA would be tested or attempted to be tested to lift DNA with things that can be linked to the activities of that occurred that night.
Good deal. Yeah, that was one of the questions that I had, and I was trying to, I read the DOJ policy, and apparently if there's some sort of lead or if there's any kind of lead that they can get involved, basically. And it makes sense. I mean, if you have a lead on somebody, why go run their family tree? Just take their DNA from the trash and try to see if it matches. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, you're talking about that. I thought you were talking about what type of evidence to be processed first. But yes, also for the I was surprised that that there is an issue about that DNA, and the courts will have to probably settle that of how they're going to approach some of the processes that was used by the FBI and these other agencies in determining that DNA. Like I said, that's something that we never faced years ago, but now there's DNA. What is it? 23andMe and all this other stuff. All these they have certain protocols of can you even use it to identify in criminal activities. So we just have to see where it's going to go.
Yeah. For me, I don't understand the argument, to be honest with you, from the defense's side. That IGG report or workup isn't used as evidence against Kohberger. So what they're trying to do is enter evidence that's not being used so they can throw it out. I mean, it's not going to have an effect on the other DNA that's out there, or the DNA on the sheath, or the warrant that was obtained to match Kohberger's DNA to it. So I just kind of seem to think that is a pointless
I see it as nothing burger. I don't understand it.
Yeah, me either. And, I know that there's a lot of folks that are like, oh, you would want to know, all the evidence against you. And I was like, I understand that. I get that. But there are certain things that happen during an investigation. Somebody says that they don't want to testify. They don't want to, talk. They just kind of point you in a direction. Well, you still got to build your case. And if you go and, build the case the appropriate way, you don't ever have to use that information. And so that's kind of where I'm at on that. We're going to be asking some questions real quick before we head on out of here. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. Why would a person take his own car registered to himself to a crime scene? On top of that, get caught on cameras. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he underestimated the amount of cameras, and their ability to identify that vehicle. People make mistakes. Criminals try to, it happens every day that they think they're smart, and they are in certain cases, but there's no such thing as a perfect crime. And if you take a tag off another vehicle and place it on your vehicle, what tag rigger is going to catch you? And and then you get stopped for that, and you're dressed up as a serial offender 101. You're wearing gloves and mask, and your car is decked out with protective materials that there's certain risks. But yeah, I understand your point. But he was able to escape with his registered car for 60 days?
For me on this question, and then I'll go to you, Jaime. I don't understand, honestly, the taking somebody else's car avenue is a smarter way of getting away with a crime. First and foremost, we got to figure out, where is he getting this car? Is he stealing it? Now he has to get, out of two crimes, the murder and the theft of the vehicle. Is he renting it? Well, there's going to be some sort of documentation that the vehicle was rented. And, I'm pretty sure law enforcement are going to go and check to see if there's any vehicles that were rented or sold or test driven, around the time of the incident. And or does he go and borrow it? Now, he's new to the area. He has very little friends, and probably the friends or the people that he does communicate with are other students that are following criminal justice. So I doubt he's going to find somebody in that realm that is going to be like, hey, you can use my car. And even if he did use somebody else's car, I think that person, if they didn't have knowledge about it, would have been like, hey, I let Bryan use my car. I let somebody use my car this night and this horrific thing happened. If it's a college student that's trying to be in criminal justice that understands reporting things, they're probably going to go forward to the police department and say, hey, I lent this person my vehicle. So I really don't understand that avenue of using somebody else's car to get away with a crime. It's never made sense to me. What are your thoughts, Jaime?
Oh, I don't either. I think that he used his own personal vehicle, and he was. Now, do they have images that they discovered since then of his tag? I don't know. It is strange to me that they weren't able to get out of all the camera work. They weren't able to get one tag. And of all the service stations, banks, because they probably pulled every thing they could ever pull at every intersection in business.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Plus, all the tag readers are out there now, toll roads and things.
Well, I was going to answer the question itself. I think it was like you said. It's easy access for him. The easiest thing to do. Unfortunately, that car itself, the suspected car, right, did get caught on some of the cameras, and it's nowadays there's cameras everywhere. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason they called it the golden age of serial killers back in the 70s, because the technology wasn't what it is now. Now it's a lot harder, to do crimes. But I think the easiest answer is it was just easier access for him to use his own car.
Now there was you're right, but there was an image also there of the 1112 King Road residence, the next door neighbor from their Ring camera that was taken and put out there. And there are some cars that are fairly close to that camera. You can't read the tag. The Linda Lane footage as well. There's cars parked underneath that awning or in that carport area that's very close to the cameras. And because it's night, you can't read the tag. I think that may have been something that was strategic when you look at where Kohberger's vehicle was spotted, where the white Elantra was spotted. Majority of it, from what I understand, I mean, we don't have it all, obviously, but for what I understand is it was a lot of residential areas, which would have had the same technology and cameras that we've been seeing. So Lona says, many times in trials I've seen evidence sealed in paper bags after processing. Do these items degrade in the bags for future analysis if needed? And I want to add on to that. Law enforcement and prosecutors have talked about destroying this house because of possible chemicals and things of that nature and don't want people going in. How is that accurate as well? That can happen?
Let me answer the evidence seal bag first. Paper is a great. It allows the moisture to evaporate from that if you have any type of moisture in the blood or other agents, because moisture allows bacteria and a mold to develop, and that will destroy DNA. So paper is the perfect thing to prolong DNA, so it doesn't degrade. Once it's dried, it's there. And so everything has to be air dried, and paper allows that. Now, as far as the chemicals in that house, through all these chemicals that CSI, and Lord knows how much I've been exposed to, and I'll probably pay for it one of these days, because we started way back when we didn't fully understand all the chemicals that we used and we breathed, and in these closed environments. They're better prepared now, and they have the Tyvek, and they have the personal items that they can put on that will protect them from some of this hazardous breathing in respirators. It's changed over the years. And for them to say that they're going to have to destroy that house to protect people means that they used every avenue and every resource and every chemical that you can imagine to process that scene. So they have a library of evidence from in there, because you have to use a lot of luminol, you have to use a lot of needle black and all the other chemicals. And I don't know what all they used in there, but from that storyline, it tells me that the house is a health hazard.
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way. And now that you explain it in that manner, that does make sense. Angel D says, does Steve think that there must be a blood trail inside 1122 when forensics were so obviously photographing items on the floor beneath the good vibes orange canvas in the living room of 1122?
There's a lot of different types of blood trails that you'll have in that house. You'll have a blood trail from one victim to the other of transfer stains, that who was the first victim that received the first blow, and then whatever those injuries when we went to the second victim, because then you'll have the second victim that have a combination of first victim and their blood. Then you'll go to the third and to the fourth, and so you'll have that type of blood trail. Then you'll also possibly have, whereas if your clothing, your weapon, and you have blood stains on your arms, your shoulders, your knees, your shoes, that you'll have transfer stains as you come in contact with walls, doors, floors. And so you can have a blood trail that way. You can have a blood trail if you injured yourself, and the blood droplets as you move through the scene. So there's a lot of different blood trails that would be within a residence.
Gotcha. I'll go to the next one. What do you think is the reasoning on why he would go back to the scene hours later?
Same thing for these arsonists, man. You know, they'll go back. They won't see it. They won't see what they won't see are the people in fear. What's going on? Is law enforcement's doing? Are they amazed at my work? I mean, there's so many. I mean, trying to rationalize what these offenders and what their fantasy was it for him to put fear in the community? Was it so that he could go by and watch these victims' families suffer? I mean, we're talking about monsters, and they're what drives them, and what pleasures they reap from their evil deeds. And so, I mean, you know, there's probably 50 different ways that I can't even describe of why he may have wanted to do that.
I mean, what are your thoughts? What do you think is the reason why he did that?
I think he went to see and marvel at his crime and see that what is law enforcement's doing. Where are they in the investigation? And but that, you know, that's very basic. But he may be even more evil than that and want to see the other stuff also.
Yeah, same here, man. I think the fact that he went back would have been for just to see to see if they already discovered the bodies. You know, maybe he gets a thrill. They get people, or serial killers get thrills out of that. Or murderers, you know, they get thrills out of, you know, seeing their crimes being assessed and whatnot. But yeah, or either that, or I mean, a lot of people are suggesting that, are saying that also maybe he tried to get back. He remembered the sheet itself. But for me, I think it would have been just to go see if they already discovered the bodies.
So for me, I have to fall back on the profile of who this guy is. He's a very intelligent person. You know, he saw somebody supposedly, allegedly, possibly as he walked out of that room. So I'm thinking that the thought process there is that police were probably called fairly soon, and that there should be some sort of media coverage. And he can't necessarily search, Idaho murders or any of those things, especially if the crime hasn't been discovered. So he has to go back and actually see what's going on and visually get a look at it. And, when people say, is he the inside looking? Is he Papa Rogers? I never subscribed to any of those things because I felt that this person was so intelligent that they wouldn't fall under the normal, red flags that are going to be there. Is he going to go back multiple times? He went back that morning. But once the scene was discovered, according to the probable cause affidavit, he never went back. That's something that is usually not very common in these type of situations with some of these guys. So I didn't think that he would have inserted himself into the crime in this new way of, Reddit and 4chan and all these other places. But I think that was the reason why he couldn't search it. He had to go back to see what was going on. To his surprise, there's nothing there. And so that's my thoughts as far as the reasoning why he went back.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if law enforcement had that, he woke up that morning and searched homicides in in Idaho, that that would have been that's a very good point, that he knew that he couldn't do that, so he had to drive back. Good observation.
Thank you. And the one thing that also is going to, I think, be one of his downfalls is he's going to have, he's new to the area, so he drove around. He had to have driven around that back area, that route that he had taken, so he wouldn't get turned around. So there's going to be evidence of that, and he's probably going to try to say that's a pattern. However, he was only there for 4 months. 75% of the time he did it, but 25% of the time he stopped. And that 25% of the time happened after the murders. I think that's another big telltale sign. Mark asks, when collecting blood with a swab kit, does the kit require special handling after it's sealed, or can it be labeled, bagged with other evidence? Question.
Everything's separated, all evidence. You try to make it as remote and inaccessible. When first time I took evidence to the FBI lab, their standards of what they do at the FBI lab is far more restrictive than what we did. You had to take a box and you had to seal every opening, every edge, every that all corners of the lid and box, and everything had to be sealed with tape. Whereas with us, simple paper bag inside a box with just the lids taped one time down the middle was enough for our evidence room, but it's not for. But yes, you try to make it as where it cannot have any chance of cross contamination as much as possible.
Yeah, 100%. I know when I joined the force, I didn't go down any crime scene investigation stuff, but during the academy, they taught us how to do certain things. Quick story though, it just kind of popped into my head. There was one time we had a burglary, and my FTO, my training officer, was showing me how to collect blood because the person had shattered the window and climbed through and cut his arm. And my training officer gets a swab. He swabs the blood. He's like, all right, this is how you do it. And he pulls the swab right in front of him. And it's just as he does that, a big old drop of sweat lands right on the swab. And he's like, well, and that's not how you collect it either.
Oh, I've been there. I've been there. Some of the things that happen, you just shake your head. And I've been in crime scenes and you look over there and you're in shock of what your witnesses that your partner's doing. And then he looks at you and he gives you that nod. Oh man, I have messed up over here big time. And I mean, things happen, and that's, and you try to minimize those, but things happen. I mean, we're human.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Why not test any DNA found in that area that could suggest more than one person? Am I wrong to think that? I'm pretty sure that they tested every area. And I think that what you're referencing is it's not so much that they didn't test the two DNA samples that are unknown to us. I think that the workup may have even been done. Who's to say that the prosecution has it? Because prosecution doesn't have Bryan Kohberger's workup. That was all done by the FBI.
Yeah.
So
and the interesting point on this, and this is another great question that she has here, that you have all this blood pattern, and this is where the blood pattern analysis of trained individuals stand out. That you have this scene, and you may have, and they cast off, you may have 50 blood droplets, and you may have blood spatter where certain blood droplets are on a wall from some type of impact, and you're looking at this, that you have this impact stain, so we have to collect a DNA sample from it. And you may have this cast off, so we got to collect a DNA sample from it because it's two different. And then you look for the ones that are outliers, that have nothing to do with what you see, and those are the ones that really stand out. That you have a blood trail that there's no fight over here, but we have a 90-degree blood droplet or a trail of blood droplets isn't from one of the victims or shouldn't be there. Then we're looking at a type of blood stain that can be collected that might be the offender's, that he has sustained some type of injury. And so that's where the analysis and trying to figure out, it's extremely difficult to do so, but you're trained to look for those identifying blood droplets that's not associated with the victims. And you want those that are indicative that, okay, this blood droplet's found 50 feet outside the house. How did it get here? It has to be here from some type of sustained injury to the offender. Are you lucky enough to find one? Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not.
Yeah, 100%. You can't, I think people think that every square inch of that house was swabbed. And I don't think that's the case, right?
I'm pretty sure that they will have tried to identify every pattern that they could identify, just like I said, and got at least one sample from each of those. I honestly believe that's what they would have done, and I'm hoping that's what they did. And but I would imagine that yes, that you would be able to see that once the contact was made and the homicides began with an edged weapon, that every time that you pull that weapon back and every time you exert any force going after another victim, you're going to have some type of cast off.
Banda, I hope I pronounced that right, says, Steve, do you think he put a camera in the house or been in the house when everyone was out?
I think the routers and stuff, what type of camera could it be? And there's a lot of cameras out there that, but they normally either have to be cloud connected, cell phone connected, or on some type of router, and so there would be a signature either through the cell towers or otherwise for him to be able to do any of that. And I don't believe. I think that would be something that they would have found pretty.
Good deal. Thank you, Lona, for gifting one Drunk Turkey Show membership. We appreciate that. Paul says, thank you for the additional information. I'm trying to understand many aspects of this case. When you think of planning, it just seems like that one would be important. Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of questions that come in when it comes to like, this guy's intelligent, but he left the sheath. He kept his phone. He, turned his phone on. He, did all these mistakes. Like I said, when you look at the probable cause affidavit, there's a big difference when, you're planning something and you're executing something. The planning part has less stress, has less everything. It's not as a stressful situation. As soon as that action goes into plan and we see, after 4 o'clock, just in his driving habits, things were going awry. So, I would assume that things would probably get even more chaotic as soon as he entered that building.
BTK was out there for 30 years and he never committed a perfect crime. He was still messing up years into it.
Yeah.
It's just until technology caught up.
And even if he hadn't messed up with the making contact with that flop, by now they would have found him with his DNA.
Yeah, definitely.
Vixter asked, how close was the phone pings? Are you familiar with the FBI's ability to get locations on people?
I did a show on that. I can't remember of what the little name of their self-service investigative team was, but I read up on it a little bit, and it's amazing. And I don't know how precise it will be. I don't know how many towers are dedicated to just that in certain areas, but hopefully they have enough information.
So Angel D asks, is it okay to transfer evidence in the back of an open truck like the mattresses? So there has been some images that appear that there's some mattresses in an open bed of a truck. What are your thoughts on that transportation of that evidence?
Well, when I first saw that, I had to figure out what was the timeline on this, for the fact that the records and the collection of evidence in each room would show what was the condition of the bedding, how many layers. I mean, do we have a top blanket, top sheet, bottom sheet, mattress protector, box spring protector, and were those items removed and collected and sealed and preserved for evidence? Now we have mattresses that have all these layers of clothing or protective layers on them that we don't have hair and fiber that would have been able to go through. So if everything's been removed and they've gone in there and they may have used forensic light sources, alternate light sources, and they've sprayed it with chemicals and they've used filters and there's no more evidence there, then yes, if their box springs aren't going, if they have all the best evidence and all the evidence that would be on those upper layers, the box springs and the mattress itself probably has no evidential value.
Good deal. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It definitely does. Thank you, Sheza Banda, for your $5 super sticker.
Thank you.
I'll ask, what is a latent print?
Okay. A little bit different spelling, but it's a print that is invisible, or is hard. It's left on surfaces, a latent print, other prints, but you process them with powders, you make them visible, and you lift them, and it's just a fingerprint that's left. Look at the glass. When you take a drink of water, look at your glass under lighting, and you'll be able to see some of those latent prints that you left on your own drinking glasses.
Yeah, 100%. Those are, yeah. Let me see. I'm going to go through.
They're hard to see, but you can see them. They're not absolutely invisible.
Steve, I had a question. What are your thoughts about the talk about demolishing the house?
Well, like I said, from reading and understanding that due to the chemicals and that it's a health hazard, I think that's the reason why. But I don't understand why they would do it before court. Why not just seal it up until? But now it may be such a health hazard that you can't even let a juror in there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's safe to do a walkthrough for the jury itself?
It may, they may have to ventilate it.
Glass asked, and I know you had some experience in corrections. When it comes to a prisoner who is high profile like this, who has been charged with a couple of murders or multiple homicides, how are they handled in the prison? Are they separated from other prisoners? Is there a chance that you would try to put them in with somebody that you would think would be a snitch?
Well, there's all kinds of strategies out there, and sometimes you have these high profiles that you'll put them in certain parts of the population, and you have to put them once they're classified, you have to put them within a classification that you can't take some extremely dangerous individual and put him in there with people caught for jaywalking.
Right.
We have to have a separation of the masses. And then you put them in that there are some of these high profile offenders that you put them in the right environment, you'll have people that just won't get a reputation. You may lose a offender or someone accused of a crime. So there's a lot of solitary confinement for their own protection of some of these high profile cases. If he's intelligent and everything, he knows that whatever he says is going to get back, because these guys, professional snitches and otherwise, I mean, how many times we see movies, and now does it occur that you have these people that brag? Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And this is going to be the last question that we take for the night. Do you think he watched the Grub Truck live stream to know where the victims were? I don't. I personally don't, just because I think that there would be some sort of digital evidence of that. I think there was a 9-minute time where he stopped, where he's on cameras, on WSU cameras for 9 minutes, or he passed by WSU and then came back 9 minutes later. I think at that point, if he had some sort of like burner device, that he may have done some of the stalking, make sure that his victims were home. But I'm not entirely sure he actually watched the Grub Truck live stream. He would have had to have known that they were going to head that direction. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
You convinced me tonight of something I hadn't considered, that he, if smart enough, that didn't. That's how come he had to drive back to the scene. Kudos for that. And that falls right in line that he wouldn't watch the anything that would link him to that community.
Yeah, I think so too. What about you, Jaime?
Same, man. I don't think if he went through all the trouble, with his attire and everything, I'm sure he wouldn't go through and see the Grub Truck live stream and get that on his devices. You know what I mean?
Well, there's that, and he'd also have to have knowledge that they were going there. So he would have had to have been watching them at the corner club.
Stalking.
Yeah, to an extreme extent. I mean, I don't think there's any video or anything like that at the corner club that he could have been watching. Steve, I want to. Go ahead, Jaime.
I had one more question for Steve. And it has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with the cases itself. Steve, what's your opinion on serial killers? Do you think they are born or they are made?
I think both from both ends. They come are from both parts of society. Now psychopaths are supposedly born, but I think that certain individuals can be driven to that same level through certain environmental conditions, and both of them are just as dangerous, regardless.
Yeah.
Because I spoke to one of the most evil individuals I ever spoke to. We had went to arrest him. He was out of Florida, and he was on parole and for a homicide. And I asked him about it as we was taking him to jail, of who he had killed. And he said that this lady had knocked on his motel room, and he had killed her. And I said, you killed her for knocking on your door? You killed a stranger? And he said, oh, no, we talked for 2 or 3 hours. And like that was okay, that he knew her. And now how she was restrained for 2 or 3 hours, I didn't ask, but that's the mentality of some of these individuals. They just absolutely true evil, that life means nothing to them.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for coming on. We appreciate you've had extremely expertise information that really did help us out in both cases to understand certain things from a criminal scene investigative perspective. If you guys aren't following Steve at True Crime Web, go check out his YouTube channel. It's at True Crime Web. He has 11.3K subscribers. Let's get him up to 12K. Let him know that Drunk Turkey Show sent y'all. Do you have any final words or questions for us, Steve?
No, I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the awareness you bring to this community and this platform you have. You're doing, like I said, I'm honored to be here. I never expected it. And thank you for having me. And absolutely, if there's anything I can ever do for y'all, never hesitate.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We'll have you back on for sure yet again. I'm going to end the stream. Don't go anywhere. I want to talk a little bit afterwards. You guys have a great night. We'll see you all later. Jaime, send us out.
Thank you, everyone. You members, Steve, of course, mods, and whatnot, and things of that nature. If you're all drinking, I'm gonna say to just keep on saying it until they get drunk. Why not?
That's a good